just for, okay. Just for purposes of the meeting and just kind of to cover some things that we just started. I'm Rebecca Ewald and I am the village manager here for Shorewood. And I thank you again for joining us on your Monday night to spend some time with us. We have a presentation to run through with all of you regarding the 2025 budget and beyond, as I like to phrase it many times, because the budget that we're talking about this year is really impacted by a number of different infrastructure projects that not only will be in planning for purposes of next year, but because they are large infrastructure projects, they will be financed through municipal bonds, and municipal bonds span a period of 20 years. So from a financial planning standpoint, when, we're in discussion tonight, while tonight is the 2025 town budget hall meeting, we're hoping that you're going to come back and continue to talk with us as we continue on really the policy journey and telling the story of how did we get here and now where do we go from here, so that we can be as proactive as we possibly can in sharing the information that we know, but then also getting your input so that that can come back to the village board and that can help direct the village board and guide them when they come into the boardroom to make policy decisions. So with that, I just want to lay some expectations for our time together. I'd like you to come back, which means that we're going to keep this meeting to a maximum of 2 hours. I have a couple of slides, one slide in particular that's going to cover the projects that are impacting the budget this year and beyond. And that slide, I'm going to walk through each project one by one. And as I conclude one of the projects, I'm going to open it up for people to raise their hands, and I'm going to answer 2 to 3 questions from the audience, and then we'll go on to the next project. It was kindly requested that I limit the Q&A to 2 and 3 questions, because the first time we did this presentation in person, the first slide ended up taking about 1 hour and 10 minutes. And so I wanted to make sure that we got through the salient points, but then I would be happy to reconnect what there's time available following the presentation on this Zoom. Or also feel free to reach out to me one-on-one. I'd be very curious to see your questions and respond back to those so that we can keep talking. Chris, why don't we flip to slide 1? And I guess before I begin, any questions regarding the format for the night? Okay. No questions. Okay. So I want to set the table a little bit, because this is one thing that I got some questions on and really good feedback over the last week. Someone had asked me the question, why are we talking about this now? We really haven't talked as a village. It's been more informational or one-way communication regarding how we're budgeting and what that's impacting. And so I wanted to kind of just reflect back on some of the procedures that the village has every year. Every year in May or June of each year, we go through a process of recalibrating a long-range financial plan. And that includes all of our finance projects through the village, which are large infrastructure, such as the projects that you see now in the Southeast Quadrant, but primarily those items that need to be financed through municipal bond proceeds. The reason we do that is because the municipal bond spans 20 years. So you want to look at that and build in some conservative assumptions to see how that level is impacting the levy, different services that you'll provide, and the utilities. So this year is a game changer from the perspective that we had a very significant increase or project that came on that's going to impact the water utility, but also other areas of the budget as they're affected by the lead service line replacement project. For those of you who aren't aware, the EPA mandated for the first time in history, and just recently, that they're going to require that all lead service lines be replaced. A lead service line is what is connecting water to your home or your property, and it extends from the water main up until your home. And you, as a private property owner, own up until a valve box, which is typically somewhere in between or near the right of way. And then the village owns the remainder of that line and the water main. One of the unique things about the Village of Shorewood is that we are over 100 years old. And so a number of the water mains that we have in the ground that are connected to these lead services are very old, in pre-1941. So over the course of time, you can only stick so many pieces of pipe that are new into an old fragile main before you're at risk of having that line collapse. So for the Village of Shorewood, the lead service line replacement is a mandate, but the larger cost impact that we are considering with this project is the stability of the water lines itself. That is a health, life, safety need, and one that also needs to be planned for. Because as you can imagine, 100 years ago, there may not have been a lot of utilities under the ground. But the village's utilities are only one component that now run underground with telecommunication, just any number, We Energies. It gets very crowded down there, particularly when you have more narrow roadways like we do. So we need to plan for how that gets done. And the intention on the village's end is to work with someone to evaluate each of the lines that we have, the services that are a part of that, so that we can evaluate what's the best way in order to go about this project. In most circumstances, when we replace water main, most of the time we try to get the water main in and not and cut open the road and only replace a small segment of the road. In some areas that may not be possible, or there may be other things, service considerations that we need to consider before we make that decision. That also increases the cost based upon that analysis and any additional work that needs to be done at that time. That 44 million represents what we forecast and conservatively estimating that we will need to replace all of the mains and service lines, with the exception of those that have been most recently done. And I'm going to pause there for a second to see if we have any questions regarding lead service line replacement.
Becky, when we were first getting started, Linda Frank did have her hand raised, but
Oh,
I couldn't
hey,
interrupt.
Linda. Thanks for joining us. Do you want to ask your question now?
Hi there. I think
Hi.
you're launching into exactly what I had in mind, was to give the context of what's impacting the budget. So I'm sure that you'll get into the DPW facility and things like that, right?
Yes, it's on the list.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Linda. Any other hands raised, Chris?
I don't see any now, but I think my whole screen is visible here, so I apologize.
Oh, okay, no problem.
This is Karen Melton. I have a quick question. With the EPA, are there federal grants available through the EPA for this?
Great.
44 million?
Great question, Karen. I'm so happy that you brought this up. There is some federal funding that is available through BIL funding, which was approved by the president a year or two ago. And the funding for lead service lines is funneled down from the federal government through the state. In our state, it's through the DNR. And then the DNR is charged for administering those funds. With the Wisconsin DNR, the priority is placed on those communities with census tracts that are low, moderate income. So in our village, we have one and a half, I would say, area that may qualify under those parameters. And we have worked with someone to submit an application for funding. With some of the area, the lead service line only would be principal forgiveness. But the water mains that run through an area and then any roadway restoration or replacement would actually is applied through separately into a different bucket per se of the DNR financing. The DNR, if it's not funding the LMI areas, which is where they're focused on placing the funding, we've been given direction to believe that there will not be other funds available. But we also need, and this is new for the DNR and new for all the communities applying, see what type of funding they are approving to see if other communities who have a significant amount of LMI lead service lines in their community are applying and tapping into the same pool of funds. In general, what I will say is that when we talk about the lead service line here from a budgeting perspective or evaluating other tools, really what I'm evaluating is the financing of the project. What is the lowest interest rate we can get through applying and becoming eligible for a federal or state rate in order to pay for the project? And then do we have LMI areas that we can do the projects and get principal forgiveness on those LMI LSLs?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking. I was hoping someone would. Okay. I don't see any other hands raised at this time, so we're going to go on to the Public Works facility. This is a dynamic one. For those of you who aren't aware, the village has, over the last 20 years, done a number of different studies on our Public Works facility. And in my experience, Public Works is one of the departments that many times always comes to provide service where there's immediate need, such as plowing the roads, removing the trees, things that we come to kind of take for granted in our daily operation. They're also a service where they aim to fix it and move on and do the best that they can with what they have. What's been a challenge with our current facility, it is the only facility in the village that we own that we have not to date put significant investment into, meaning that it was built at a time for horse and buggy to take garbage, put it over the incinerator hole, burn that in that location and move on. And we've changed since then. The industry has changed, the needs have changed, and our improvements to the facility have not kept pace with that. So we have, even prior to me being here, there are a number of things done. It came on the radar for me as your village manager at the time when I came to the village, because there were reports or things that I was finding from previous studies. And I was thinking, gosh, we need to do something about this, because when you see some of the reports that have been here, one of which includes a request in the early 90s to do more significant evaluation on the very large retaining wall, which is on the property of the facility, it really becomes a liability. And first and foremost, we need to keep not only the public safe, but we need to make sure that we're providing a work environment that is also safe for the people who we employ. An example would be, over the last, 6 years, we have hired and had 3 mechanics resign to take other positions in other municipalities. And a lead driving reason of that is because much of the equipment that they need to work on can't be worked on within the municipal garage or the facilities, because the garage wasn't built to have a truck of this size be placed in it. So the big ones, the refuse trucks, the plow trucks. So when we don't have extras of that piece of equipment because they're very expensive, and so when it goes down or has an issue in the field, during a snow event, the mechanics are actually outside at whatever time we're in plowing, working on the truck in the winter elements and climate, under headlights and getting it placed up there because we just don't have lifts, for these trucks as well. I provide that only as an example because I think it's helpful, to understand not everyone's running a municipal garage. But those are some of the things that over time have really, hampered our ability to do, the most efficient service delivery. We have one cold storage building, which provides cold storage for every major component of operations we have. So whether it be streetlight storage, water utility storage, extra manhole lids, most of our light landscaping equipment, mowers, all within this storage building, which we're currently undergoing a structural analysis for, because it's not deemed safe yet for us to be in. And these are just, we had this wonderful facility constructed at a time, very early in the village's history. And it's just not meeting the needs. So, as our finance director had echoed back to me today, when you know better, you do better. And so we've been trying to lay out that information and really dig deep because it's a large expense. So we want to try to find the best opportunity, and the most efficient, not only from a service perspective, but from a cost perspective of how to proceed with providing a safe environment, for where we would like our employees to work. On that note, I'll just reference it by saying our village board has hired a broker to look at some additional sites just outside of the village. As we know, Shorewood, there's very little land, that's not already occupied. So we're going to take a look at some properties to see what may be a good fit. On that parcel of land, we jointly own a transfer station, with the village of Whitefish Bay that both of our communities use. For those of you who aren't aware of what a transfer station is, it's a large, almost looks like a freighter container where the garbage truck comes in, drops refuse into the container, and then it compacts it. And so then when that gets full, it's brought offsite by Waste Management for disposal. But it allows the village of Whitefish Bay and Shorewood to maintain municipal operators in performing the refuse collection, which has proven to be for both of our communities more reliable, and then allows that to be taken off-site. So with that, I want to pause to see if there are any questions related to the Public Works facility that I can answer before moving on. Linda, I see you have a question.
Yeah, so since this is one of the big items, and you mentioned that you are arranging for an investigation of other sites outside of Shorewood for the possible facility. There are so many questions involved with how to go forward with the DPW site, right? In terms of what services will be continued and so on. And so I'm wondering what the big picture view is of this, since this is such a big part of the budget.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we are at the board that I'm working with right now has been taking a step further to peel back the layer on those questions. I don't have a framework yet that we're working with. I think much of that is also going to be dependent on whether operations move from the current location or whether they remain at the current location, and then what services remain at the current location. The transfer site logistically needs additional room. We can't, based upon the space analysis that we've conducted on the site and the needs for operations, it's not possible physically to reconstruct buildings on the site with the transfer station at the same time. So the ability to move one or both of the services will be greatly dependent upon land that may be available. And then once we know what is available, it provides a platform to say, you know, to state what the questions will be, which will also include the village of Whitefish Bay. Because of the fact that we jointly own the transfer station together, and the agreement that we have to run and operate that station together expires coming up in 2025. So we're trying to do our best part to come to the table with options and information that we have so that we can have that discussion. And I anticipate, and my hope is that by us starting the conversation with the community and talking about these large projects and their different facets, that we're going to have additional opportunities in the future to come together in meetings like this. And to share what we know and to talk about the next steps that we'll be exploring in order to get to the next step of evaluating how we should best proceed.
There's a question in the chat. It just says, if another site is procured, what would be the plan, what the plan would be for the current site?
We don't have a plan for the current site. So great question. Thank you so much. I forgot who asked that question, but one of the other tasks that I'm working on right now is actually doing an evaluation of the current public works site. So a significant part will also include an analysis of that retaining wall, its condition, that runs along the east side of the property. There's a very steep incline and a wall that was put in over time. There's also been modifications made to that. So we're going to be obtaining a survey of the entire site, which we don't have on file now. Inventorying exactly where that wall is and any improvements that may be placed in that area of the wall, perhaps by private property owners as well. Over the course of the last 100 years after the facility was built. And then looking at the different aspects of how to potentially reconstruct that wall, whether we move or whether we stay. There are about 5 or 6 different construction techniques on the wall that is there now. And now when the wall was initially constructed, there were no homes located to the east along Morris Boulevard because that subdivision had just recently been platted. So constructing within the existing buildings that are now there, as well as the method of construction, will impact that cost. So we're taking a look at both of those right now, and we're hoping to provide more information to the village board on that in November and December. To address more directly, the $20 million is the estimate that was provided by Barrientos Consulting in 2023, and that is to construct a new building with the square footage and requirements we would need for a facility that would last us into the next 50 to 75 years. Okay.
I apologize for interrupting. Becky, I think you may have said this during the housekeeping, and I apologize to the group. The chat function was to be disabled, so I think it just got, and that was only to take questions during the Q&A portion by using the raised hand function. So I apologize for having it on, then switching it off, but I think this will help us to corral questions and at those intervals that we're pausing.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. Any other hands raised? Okay, then I'm going to move on to the streetlight system replacement. I have to share that it is extremely unique for a community to receive such significant public feedback on the operation of the streetlight system, where a board studies the entire system. And because of our age of our system, where literally we have some streets where just the wire that's going from light to light is resting in the ground. Typically with today's construction methods, you know, any wire that you run underground, you put in conduit to keep it safe from the elements, but also more importantly, to identify where those wires are, so that they can be found if there's an issue with one of them under the ground. We don't have that conduit or technology and the majority of lines that we have here in the village. The streetlight system is comprised of a couple of different aspects, and I'll just cover them briefly. But you have the physical streetlight structures themselves. You have the underground wiring, and then you also have junction boxes or these service boxes. We just generally call them streetlight boxes here in the village. And those will power the systems in various areas of the village. One of the things that's important to note is that when we talk about replacing the entire streetlight system, we're looking at it through two public safety lenses. Number one, for all of the community who walks in the village and transverses through the village during those evening hours, where streetlights really play an important part of lighting the way, but also from a public safety aspect of, you know, providing the light and making sure that people are visible and noticeable. The second public safety aspect of it is really for our employees and those people who may come into contact with some of these streetlight boxes or equipment. Right now, the electrical capacity in some of these are just simply not safe for people to be operating on. And so over the course of time, it has bled into a system that does not function properly for a number of different reasons. Our village board went and got a conceptual review on what it would take potentially to help fix the system. That conceptual report said that it would need to be replacement of the new system or of a new system in its place. Just this year in 2024, the village board received a report that talked through what the best way would be to go about doing it. And so the plan that came up was and suggested was to do a 5-year phased implementation of the streetlight system. You phase it for a number of different reasons, but the first would be so that you're not taking down the system all in itself. We need streetlights operable in the majority of the village. So divided the village up by these circuits, electrical circuits, into 5 different parts. We have currently designed phase 1, and we'll be ready to bid phase 1 implementation for construction in 2025 next year. One of the dynamics about the project is that typically in a community, you're going to try to bite this off a little bit at a time. The village board did look at extending the time frame for installing a new system, whether we wanted to do phase 1 and then wait maybe another 3 or 4 years and do phase 2 and stretch it out over a 20-year period of time or a 15-year or an 8-year period of time. One of the challenges with that is that the technology will also continue to change. So you want to make sure that the parts and components that you're planning for with the system will all correlate with each other. Second is that it would take just that long to perform the project. And there, as I said again, is a significant amount of public feedback with the community desiring streetlights to be operable and working at the time that they're installed. So that is what brought this element to be placed on the list this year. And I can take any questions if someone has them about streetlights at this time.
I have a question.
Hi,
Sorry,
Liz.
can't find my hand to raise.
Oh,
So I'm wondering, because this light system is 100 years old, how did we not start a fund earlier for this? And is there anything else infrastructure-wise that is coming down the pike that we should be starting funds for, similar to this kind of investment?
Yeah, great question, Liz. So just one point of clarification, where a number of the wires in the ground can be closer to that 100-year, a lot of our major box components are closer to the 70s. But that being said, streetlight systems usually have a span of 35 years, 35 to 40 years from what the report had said. So, I've been here for the last 6. What I can share about the prior, I don't know why different boards at certain times didn't maintain a fund for replacement. But one of the things that I've had to reconcile, I think, for myself is going through the learning process with our board and the community, is that none of these projects got here overnight. This community has been here for over 100 years. And at different times and in different communities, there's competing priorities and capacity for that matter. And so you'll see priorities change and shift with that. And I always want to come from the perspective that for anyone who has been here or leading or with the group at the time, that they've really been trying to do the best that they can for the community with the issues on the table at that time in the best way that they know how. To address the question of what are we doing to plan for other improvements? Well, this is, I'm really excited that you asked me that too, only because the long range financial plan is what we use in order to drive the decision process for how it looks over the course of time from a financial standpoint. And really, in the last 2 years, we have not seen the mandated requirements from these changes, but then also the research done with the board to really lean into these, 2 to 3 topics. One, because we're required, the other 2, because we know at some point improvements will need to be made, and we also want to be financially efficient with them. Meaning that you don't want to repair something only to know that it's going to break in the next year. And that is what I would argue would be a strong driver behind how the board chose to evaluate the streetlight system replacement. Ideally, moving forward, one of the high impact options that we'll be talking about a little later that has been recommended to the board is that we fund only critical components in our 2025 budget. And then in early 2026, we go in and do a detailed review of our capital budgeting and how our approach and our philosophy towards funding items in the future moving forward. Right now, the budget or the village has had a process of funding a piece of equipment in a certain year. In other communities, they also have the option of funding a little bit along the way, so that over the course of the 10 years, that item becomes funded and then available for use. So we want to talk about what some of those other approaches might be so that we can be more forward focused in how we're planning. I see
We
Nancy.
have one more hand up.
Yeah.
Nancy Helland. Okay.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, I just wanted to touch back on the 17.4 million for the streetlight
Sure.
placement. So is that for whether it takes place in 2025 or, over several years, or is that just the allotted for 2025, 17.4, or is that for the whole project, however long it may take?
What great question. 17.4 million is the estimated construction cost for replacing the entire system. The replacement would take place over a 5-year time frame. So next year would start phase 1, and then following in 2026, phase 2, 27, phase 3, 28, phase 4, and so on. The number that is an estimate at this time because that is the estimate that the designer has given on the system. I fully anticipate that when we bid phase 1, we're going to have our best indication of how close that design estimate came to the actual design based upon the market and vendors who do this type of replacement. I also referenced that the 17.4 is estimated because in order to do this project, and having millions allotted over these 5 years, we would be borrowing each year. And so each of those borrowings would have, a specific interest rate that they're at and an amount, because not, all of the work is evenly divided cost-wise over the 5-year period based upon the design of the system. So when I say estimate, I say that for a reason, because each year we would be recalibrating on the amount that it took to replace that system and adjusting the impact for the residential homeowner, based upon that year. Right now, it's estimated at $150 a year based upon the 17.4 million. If we get a lower interest rates, you know, that's going to be applied to the formula, and then that's going to be logged in to drive that calculation. We had a lot of people, not a lot, but I mean, a couple who said, you know, why wouldn't you just have phase 1 of the streetlight system pay for the phase 1 project? Well, we didn't really think that that would be equitable because we all use the streets. And whether it's your neighborhood or not, we're all benefiting from that. And not all of the phases have the same dollar amount. One's 3.3, another is 2.2. So that didn't seem like a just way to go about assessing it. Residential property owners, meaning those properties that have under 4 units, right now have the estimated $150 fee. We have in the village 210, 215 commercial properties. And those residential units will be assigned to against the commercial assessed values of those properties. So for example, a building that is under 250,000 in commercial would pay 2 units. A building over 250,000 but up to 500,000 would pay 3 units. And then so on and so forth until you hit the largest bracket, which is over 30 million. I think the only property that fell into that would have been Metro Market, and their annual fee is estimated at $1,500 and some change. You know, it's tough because regardless of whether you're a commercial property or a residential parcel, our parcel sizes in the village are small. And so you can have 100 people or 50 people living in the same size, in a building that has the same lot size as some residential property owners. So we tried to equate that with the fact of we have a number of people within those facilities that also need to participate in the cost.
And is the 17.4 million estimate locked in with the vendor so that, for example, the luminaire manufacturer or the street pole manufacturer are not coming back in phase 3 and saying, actually, our prices have increased?
Mm-hmm. So the design of phase 1 has been completed, and that project will be bid. In the next year, we would then design phase 2. And then the following year, phase 2 would be bid. So there would actually be 5 different bidding times over the span of the 5 years that vendors would be available to bid on the construction of that particular phase.
So that 17.4 million could really increase dramatically on the bidding process. Like 5 years from now, those prices are going to be dramatically, it could be much more expensive.
It's a possibility. We've worked with a vendor to develop our best estimate based upon what we know. But that's also a reason that's good to recalibrate, because we also on the alternative, we don't know where we may learn efficiencies and savings based upon what we learn from each phase of construction.
And again, this could also, are there incentives from Wienergy's or other state entities for this utility upgrade?
There are not any other subsidies or funding available that we are aware of at this time for replacement of a streetlight system.
Nothing from IRA. from the infrastructure?
Oh, no, none that we're aware of.
Okay.
But Nancy, if you find something, I would like you to call. I see a hand raised, I believe it was next by Steve Robinson.
It's Linda Larman.
Oh,
Oh,
Linda. Oh,
okay.
I'm sorry. On my screen, I have like a Steve Robinson who's like in the one
Bo-
box above you.
Both of us.
Oh,
It's
it's
all right.
both of you at the same time. Well,
Oh,
welcome.
I'm sorry, Steve Robinson. I apologize.
Go ahead, Linda.
Okay. Well, I may be jumping the gun on this question a little bit, but because Rebecca, you mentioned the 150 per household. When I was looking at the options on the Let's Talk website, part of the website this afternoon, that you're requesting we weigh in a survey. There were two of them, there are two of them, I think, this being one of them. And the other one is the trash collection that are per household, these fixed fees. Correct me if I'm misstating that. But if that's correct, it seemed to me that as a policy matter, paying for items this way is somewhat of a regressive tax policy. So that the person with the $350,000 house is paying the same fee as the person with the $1 million house. Whereas if you sort of work backwards, we need to raise X million dollars, and that were put into property taxes, because property taxes are based in significant part on home assessments. They're somewhat more progressive. So I just wondered if it's possible for you to address that.
Well, it's exactly that. It's two different approaches. So one thing that the board could do is approach it from the assessed value perspective. That's not computations that I've run right now. But that's something that the board by all means could consider. I would really encourage you to put that feedback in the poll that gets done. Because we're going to be collecting those comments on each one as we kind of analyze the information, then also share with the board and the community as possibilities for alternative strategies.
I'll type it in capital letters.
Great. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Steve. Hi, Steve.
Thank you. Question is, do you know how other communities, similar communities, have funded infrastructure replacements like this, where it's a known cost that's going to come up every, as you said, 35 years? Do they usually issue bonds, or do they usually fund it in other ways? And what's kind of the norm? And kind of piggybacking off of that question is part of the process here to set the plan for how these streetlights will be replaced again in 35 years, right?
Mhm. So let me start with the first part. Typically, when municipalities have projects of this magnitude, they are financed with municipal bonds. Those have a 20-year term. So that's going to be the typical go-to for any municipality. That's just the structure that we have. So that's why we talk about 20 years. With regards to, I think, and you begged the absolute correct point, which is, when the village makes a decision on this initial system, we then need to leave the record and a more refined tool of, hey, if these streetlight systems last 35 to 40 years, in this decade, this is when you're going to start looking at this. And usually, in the world that we're in, sometimes it can take years to design, construct, because, you're doing requests for proposals or things in different areas. You can be watching that cost and then also putting inflation risers on that, so you can at least have a ballpark or a placeholder that you can be providing for the next set of leadership who would be taking on the second replacement. Steve, did that answer your questions?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. All right, I don't see any other hands raised, so I'm gonna move on to the next. And this is one that we're all familiar with right now because we're currently in phase 2. And it is the Southeast Area Combined Sewer Projects, otherwise and affectionately known as CC, because it had to get an acronym that I could use more easily as we talked about this project. For those of you who weren't in the village in 2010 and for multiple decades before this, the issue of our combined sewer capacity has been an issue for the village going back to the 40s. So to provide a general framework, we have about half of the village, which is in an area that has separated storm sewer and sanitary sewer. The other half of the village has combined sewer and sanitary sewage all together. And that is predominantly on the east side of the village. Right now, we're doing a significant amount of work off of Downer Avenue, and that project started as a part of the CC project. Back in 2020 or 2021, must be 2020. For those of you who aren't familiar, the village has studied this topic every decade, typically has walked away from it because of cost. Finally, in 2017, late 2017, MMSD agreed to fund the enlarging of our combined sewer under Edgewood. Edgewood is a roadway that is half owned by the city of Milwaukee and half owned by the village of Shorewood. The pipe that lies underneath is owned and operated by MMSD. MMSD up until 2017 would not agree to replace that pipe. It was an extreme expense, but it does service both of our communities. When that decision was made, the village board then made a decision to go and look at how to increase our combined sewer capacity in the southeast area of the village, which was struggling for 2 reasons. Number one, the sewer pipes were put in the ground long ago. They were smaller size, and we just didn't have any capacity of where to feed that sewage until that larger line got installed. The CC in the village of Shorewood got designed. It is designed in 3 separate phases, starting with replacement of those pipes closest to Edgewood and then working its way back. In 2023, we did phase 1 construction, which was just off of Edgewood by the Stratford area. And this year, it is Downer from Edgewood to Capitol Drive. And phase 3 concludes in 2025 with the sewer on Lake Drive that would be installed at the time that the DOT has dug up Lake Drive for purposes of replacement. I want to preface this by saying when the CC, when the board initially, boards ago, decided to do this project, I had said to people, wow, this is the largest infrastructure project that the village had ever undertaken outside of just constructing the village initially in the early 20s and 30s. And I thought, wow, this is a game changer, right? This is a big endeavor. And at that time, this was really the only significantly large project on the horizon that we were trying to lean into and design and find the best way. Because the pipe sizes get so big, it's hard to place and fit all of this infrastructure under the road. So it was really a design feat. And as we went through it, it separated up into 3 phases. And then we started to hear the rumblings from the EPA of wanting to consider mandating the lead service line replacements. All of those areas that we were going to be digging into had adequate water main. The water main under Downer is one of the oldest we have in the village. There's literally a section of brick pipe, like bricks that are molded to to form that big pipe. That were in that area. And from a construction standpoint, every time you dig into a road, you degrade the construction value of the road. So meaning that the more you dig into it, the more likely you're gonna have to replace that in an earlier time frame. Well, the village then began to look more holistically and said, okay, if we're gonna come into this area and do this work, and we're gonna disrupt a lot, just to do the sewer pipe, we need to make sure that we're addressing the other areas that may likely be a requirement of us in the future. So we're not coming back to this area for purposes of construction. And so then the project took on a much different life, but I would say from a fiscal planning and also just efficiency standpoint, the board was absolutely ensuring that they were going to leave things in the best place that they could so that it wasn't a liability later. I'm going to pause there for a second. Some people have said that I get a little excited when I talk about infrastructure projects, so I'm going to pause to see if there are any questions. There's one from Charles.
Yes, I did some quick research on streetlight system replacement grants. The Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant is available from federal government. The due date for the application is October 31, 2024. There's also a congestion. Yeah, and there are a couple others. There's one through the state. But the programs I found are the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant. There's also a Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement Program. They're saying LED streetlights can qualify if they reduce emissions from maintenance vehicles, et cetera. So I found like 4 possibles.
Great.
Two definitely we are in range for the application date. I'll forward them to someone after the meeting.
Oh, could you forward them to me?
Yes, I will.
Wonderful.
And
Thank you,
I'll
Steve. Or pardon me, not Steve,
grant
Charles.
the others also.
What was that last part?
I'll research possible grants for the other projects also.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay. You're welcome.
Any other questions?
See any other hands?
Okay,
Wait,
thanks, Chris.
sorry. It's Liz again. I cannot find the hands. So Charles has brought up a good point about grants. Are we looking, is it common practice to look for grants before we try to fund things? Because Charles just found that it sounds like very quickly. And I think this is like ultimately what we count on you guys to do for us. And I just want to make sure that there are common good practices in place so that nothing's falling through and the taxpayers aren't having to pay for things that we don't need to be paying for.
Yes. So I want to let you know that grants are one thing that we review the projects for. My understanding from the consultant who worked with this on this also had an availability to look for that and did not provide any of those options. So I'm happy to go back and consult with them and to look at what Charles has sent.
Thanks.
I think there's one other question from Kelly.
Hi, it's actually her husband, Keith Stason. I
hi,
had
Keith.
hi, how you doing? Have a
Good.
question in infrastructure and the proposed building on the 3 different lots. We talk about our 100-year-old infrastructure. Have we included a study? You just talked about the combined sewer. I've done a little research on, the flood of 2010.
Mhm.
of adding, if we build on, say, the library lot and we add 50 units, what is that going to do to our sewer capacity? Is it going to overtax our system? And is that going to be something we're going to require the developers to chip in for? Before we start adding capacity, we need to look at what capacity we have. Has
Mhm.
that been looked into?
I have not looked at it on these sites specifically, with the exception of speaking to our village engineer, who, when they evaluate development here in the village, my general question to him was, hey, is there even capacity to take development of these sites? Because if so, you need to say yes or no. I wasn't looking to do any in-depth analysis because that's typically the cost responsibility of the developer. But he had said, yes, in general, yes, there appears to be capacity. However, the developer must go through that application process with the DNR. So that was not a step that we were going to take. But the estimate and the feedback from him was, yes, there appears that there would be capacity.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, I don't see any more hands raised at this time, so Chris has advised me that we're almost hitting an hour, so I'm gonna speed up on these last couple. We have Lake Drive. For those of you who aren't aware, Wisconsin Department of Transportation owns Lake Drive and is the designer and implementer of this project. The village, by a state municipal agreement, funds portions of the activity based upon that cost percentage with the DOT. So an example would be, estimate 20%, we'll pay for 20% of the pavement underneath the roadway, or the driving lanes. We are responsible for paying for all of the park or all of the pavement replacement where there is on-street parking. Lake Drive designs and funds the installation of the storm sewer on this road. We are trying to capitalize on the fact that we're constructing during this time, and we will be doing the water main replacement, and the water utility will be funding that, in addition to the sanitary sewer that we just referenced, the addition for CC Phase 3. We are also going to be looking at lining sewer. Whenever we can line sewer, we're going to attempt to do it where it's most appropriate for that pipe size. This project does have a fairly significantly sized main that will be lined to help save on cost. But those are the dynamics that are going on at this time. We will also, as I'm sure many of you have followed, within just the design process over the last 5 years, they're going to be adding some different bike lane configurations and pedestrian improvements and rapid flashing beacons at particular places. As a part of this project, they will also be replacing all of the streetlights on Lake Drive. So that will be incorporated as well. Any questions on Lake Drive? Okay, Chris, do you want to pull up that other bullet? North Oakland Avenue reconstruction. This project is scheduled for 2026. It goes from Capitol Drive to the end of the village limits, up at Glendale, and is started out as a pavement replacement, but there was a lot of encouragement from community and from the board to enhance that by putting in bump outs at different crossing location, evaluating our bus stop locations with MCTS, and enhancing the area from that perspective. Of course, the water main was added as a component as a part of this project, and some of the LSLs that are within this area would also be up for replacement. The reconstruction of North Oakland Avenue is being funded by TID 5. That is the TID that was put into place for purposes of the Metro Market redevelopment. So that TID will close following completion of this project and the funding of it through that tax increment district. Okay, Chris, I don't see any hands, so if you could pull up the next bullet. Oh, there's Linda. I spoke too soon.
Yeah, can you talk about TIDs a little bit? Uh, sort of in an elementary way. I have a general idea of them, but it's very general. So when you say it's being funded through TID 5, what does that mean?
I'm gonna try to keep it general and offer to reconnect with you and anyone else who would like to learn more about TIDS, just because of our time constraints tonight. But in essence, when a TID is formed, the municipality and all of the taxing agreement or taxing jurisdictions, so MMSD, Shorewood Schools, MATC, they get together, they review a TID plan. So typically, be it not for the public assistance coming to the project, either for public improvement or private improvements, the development wouldn't happen. So the community or there's funds that are leveraged to create the development, the value of taxes that property that's being developed would be paying to the municipality freezes at the time of creation, and the increment that the development brings to the community after the TIF is put into place then funds the improvements that are required to fuel the development. When those improvements are complete from the project plan that was initially approved, the TID then retires. And in the case of TID 5, the leadership at the time had specifically wrote into the project plan that the roadways or the roadway on North Oakland be evaluated from a traffic impact and pedestrian perspective, and then also updated to replace or to reflect any of those changes. And that is the reason why it's being funded by TID 5. I see a question from Kate.
How do I, oh, yeah, here we go. Unmute. Hi. You've got your, sorry, there's two of us in the same room.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I wanted to ask a quick question about the lead service line replacement. I'm wondering, should I wait until this meeting is over and ask Ben, because I don't want to take you off
So what I could hear is that you had a question on lead service line replacement, and I think it's for, is it for your property? Oh, Kate, I can't hear you. But at any rate, I would welcome the opportunity to connect with you following the meeting on your lead service line. You are welcome to email me or just call me tomorrow. And just let me know that you were the person on the call tonight that wanted to know more about your LSL. And if I don't know the answer, I'll get you in the right direction.
What? Oh, just a second. All right.
Okay. So we covered North Oakland, and then we have another dynamic that we're discussing this year, our current capacity considerations. So the people who have been here deploying the services that we receive in our community are the same people who are being asked to deploy on these projects. And we're really trying to think thoughtfully about what that does in the work environment over the course of time, because there's only so much time in the day. And so there's only so much that we can tackle at one point in time. And that's definitely showing in the amount of review and analysis that we have been doing on these different projects. So that is going to be a touch point and conversation and thoughtfulness as we plan for the projects moving forward. Chris, I think there's one more bullet that directly dovetails into service considerations. One of the things that we have asked of the board to do is in 2025, we really need to get some large policy direction on high impact options. And then following conclusions of this cycle, we want to come back and continue this discussion with you because we want to not only evaluate the service levels, but allow the public to weigh in on how they want to see those services continue or not in the future. So that's going to require a couple of things. It's going to require us to educate everyone right now in terms of how services are deployed. Number two, we'll run cost analysis over what removing or replacing or eliminating that service may mean. And then number three is where you all come in. We need to hear from the broad spectrum of the community in terms of how they'd like to proceed with those options that are available. So I'm hopeful that you're all going to come back and join me in the first quarter of 2025 as we start outlining that schedule with the board, and then take a deeper dive into what some of those other options may be. You know, there was someone in our first session last week who said, you know, why aren't we doing that right now? And there are some items within the budget from a policy perspective that we want to be forward thinking about with the board, because those decisions have an opportunity to either positively or negatively impact the budget situation in the following year, and then the year after that, and the year after that. So we've asked for the group to take a long-term focus, but we also want to be thoughtful with how we're looking at those services so that we can all have an opportunity, in particular, the public weigh in regarding how we'd like to proceed. Chris, I think there's one more bullet. Competitive employee marketplace. So in the village environment, we have typically done a salary survey of our employees every 2 years. It was extended for 3 years, branching over COVID and transition of staff. From 2021 until 2024, we saw a significant shift in where our employees were with perspective to the marketplace. And that's not new news. You know, if anyone is managing employees or has a business, this has been a trend that we've all been seeing. It's hard to find employees in the municipal environment. We have a number of other municipalities who are near us and all around us. And so when people who are in this line of work go to look for where to work, you can choose to a certain extent where you apply, and you know what environments that you'd like to be in. Our salary survey came back this year, and Chris can correct me if I'm wrong, but 71% of our employees were under the average market, under average market wages for the work that is being done, which results in a competitive environment for people to also be attracted to other communities or seek other opportunities. So that is also a topic that the village board is working on right now. So what does that all mean for this year? So I'm going to transition over then to the second part of our time together tonight, which is really focused on what are the high impact options that may positively or negatively impact the budget in the following budget cycle moving forward, as we look at the next decade or 20 years in some of these projects. So these are the topics and some of the things that we're asking for you to weigh in on in the poll. At the very end of the poll, we welcome you to, once you plugged in these responses, we welcome you to then go directly, and we provide the link for you. Once you hit submit, you can go to our website and leave any of your thoughts or information that you want to share in general with us, because we're going to be cataloging that information. But for purposes of this poll, we focused it on these areas. Number one of the high impact options is increasing the levy. Typically in the past, at least in my time here in the village, they tried to keep that levy increase from year to year at 2% or under. They also had the fortunate experience for at least the last decade of choosing to utilize some additional fund balance proceeds that they had to help pay for a portion of any debt payment each year. So what that did in essence, it subsidized the debt payment in a time when we didn't have significant projects because there was a thought process that if the funds are there, we want to use them. We don't want to let them sit. If our financial policies don't require us to have them there to meet different financial metrics for bond rating and financial purposes. So 2024 was a conclusion of utilizing that, what we call debt stabilization here in the village. And so in each of these prior years, costs have increased 3 to 4.5% annually. But because of that stabilization, it kept that levy at around 2% or lower. Next year, we don't have that availability. And so we've looked at the concept of, well, what if we increase the levy? And so some options maybe instead of doing a fee or a charge, what would the impact be for increasing property taxes 2, 4, 6, 8% with the property tax bill in that year. So in the options, we actually call it what that would be for a $340,000 home. So an example, a 2% increase would be an impact of $52. A 4% increase would be an impact of $103. 6% increase would be an impact of $155. 8%, an estimated $207. And for purposes of these one sheets that are provided on the website and that we reference, they are all developed utilizing our currently approved 2024 budget. So they are, estimate based on the real numbers that we have just worked on. So this is one option that is available. Chris, do you want to flip to the next slide? Perfect. Another concept that we're looking at is, what if we took the cost of service for providing recycling and refuse, operational cost only. So not capital expenditures such as the cost of the trucks or the cost of the trash compaction equipment, but just the cost of annual operations, which primarily includes the cost of our employees going out to provide the refuse service, and then our contract with Waste Management for recycling services, and then to remove the large crates from the trash compactor that the refuse and the yard waste and leaves are placed in during the year. So when we looked at that and evaluated what that true cost is to provide that, it equated out to approximately $150 or $153 for residential property owner. And so that would be a residence that's under 4 units. One of the things that's happening now is because this charge is actually inside the levy, it is divided over all of the assessed value in the village. So you have commercial property owners who are 4 units and above, who are required to contract for their refuse and recycling service outside of the village and pay for it independently, but is currently sharing this cost with the community. Chris, are there any more bullets? Oh, thank you. One of the things that we also talked about, and I don't know if everyone is aware of this, but several years back, the village embarked on really wanting to educate and provide options for composting. The village did this by contracting with a vendor and providing a subsidy for each household that chose to compost. So right now, if you're a residential property in the village and you choose to compost, you contract with Compost Crusaders, and then they will reduce your compost fee by, I think, $1.20 per pickup. And then that is actually billed to the village, and the village then pays that on behalf of those people who are receiving the composting service. Because this recycling and refuse charge seeks to align use with the users, that the subsidy would be removed, and then those property owners would have an option to continue composting directly with Compost Crusaders without the subsidy.
We have a couple of raised hands. I think it was Karen first and then Linda.
Oh, great. Hi, Karen.
Okay, thank you. So I feel like we're double dipping here on the charge because we're already paying for this in our property taxes. And then you're saying, but we don't have enough, we need to come back and ask you for another $150 on top of what we're already assessing you at. And so, for example, in Beckwan, residents don't pay for recycling pickup. That's a separate charge if they want to get that. Yeah, I mean, some of the benefit of living in Milwaukee County is that that's included in our taxes, but now you're saying, well, yes, but we've got all these additional expenses, so one way we can subsidize these additional expenses is to charge you again.
Great, great comment. Happy that you brought it up because can be confusing. The cost, how we pay for refuse and recycling now comes out of the levy. And the state also regulates how we can allocate costs within that levy. You are absolutely correct. This does not subsidize a cost. It would be an extra charge in place of that would be listed as a separate charge on your bill, but then leaves available in the levy, 550,000 that could be used or repurposed for other projects or paying or for the financing for other projects.
So the 550 could go towards the 44 million lead service line.
A portion of that project cost, yes. Or streetlight replacement, or paying for CC and Lake Drive.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda.
Thanks. Do you have a number on, so this would be the $150 if this were enacted, would be charged to property owners of 4 units or less? Is that what you said?
Under 4 units, yes.
Under 4 units, okay. And the bullet says directly to those that benefit from the service. Do you have a number of, at least roughly, the percentage of people who don't have their trash picked up?
Well, primarily anyone who's, under that 4 units is
Yeah.
receiving these services from us. The ones that don't are the commercial properties, and that's
Right,
210 or 215.
right.
And that's
Right.
parcels. So some of the larger properties and, your tax exempt. You have about 15 tax exempt throughout the village. They're not receiving that service either.
Okay. So essentially, when it says user charge of 150 allocates the expense directly to those that benefit from the service, that's basically all of us.
Except, well, we say all of us, but yeah, so 53% of our population here is tenant-based. So
Right.
they're not single family homeowners. So some of the so that's just it's just the makeup of our community.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Chris, why don't we move to the next slide? Vehicle registration fee. So this has been in our state statutes for a number of years. The DMV charges vehicle owners a registration fee on an annual basis for their vehicle. The state statute allows for a municipality to implement a fee as a part of that vehicle registration fee to help pay for transportation related expenses. And in the villages, under the village's project load, That essentially, for me, the largest thing that I identify with that is really to replace roadway disrupted as we move forward with water main, relaying water main or paying for the road impacts as a part of that project, which we know is going to be with us for a number of years moving forward. The village has approximately 7,800 registered vehicles. Communities and counties typically implemented charge between $20 and $40. And here $30 is used for purposes of the analysis. That would generate an additional $234,000 in revenue annually. That then again, the village would need to allocate directly to pay for transportation related expenses. And from that, the largest that we will have before us will come from these large projects that we have, such as Lake Drive, and then any of the roadways that then get phased into replacement of water main and lead service line replacement. I do want to note that in Milwaukee County has a charge on the vehicle registration fee already that you have been paying. I don't recall off the top of my head when that was implemented, but it was within the last 10 years. The city of Milwaukee also has a wheel checks fee that they add on to vehicle registration for the same reason. So, you know, in our, those are municipalities in Milwaukee County who are utilizing this option at this time. Okay. Streetlight system replacement plan charge. We talked about this a little bit more when I was describing the projects, but in short, if you have under 4 units, we have a charge of approximately $150 for those residents. It's estimated here. It would be recalibrated for each of the next 5 years moving forward and then stay the same based upon that adjusted interest rate of what we obtained for our financing of that time. And the actual cost of the construction, because right now we only have estimates for those phases. For the commercial property owners, as I also mentioned before, for those who have just come on to the call and may have missed this part, the commercials would pay a unit charge, which is based on the residential unit, based upon their assessed value. Because many of our parcels are small and some commercial property owners or properties that are small have a greater increase in density of the amount of people that are within that unit structure. So that it's stepped over 10 different allocations, the highest of which are properties over 30 million. We have only one, which would include the metro market. So their estimated annual charge would be $1,528. A property over $1 million would have an estimated charge of $765. A property over, 250,000 would have an estimated charge of $459. That cut sheet on the website, if there's anyone who's a commercial owner on the call, the website has a 1-page FAQ with regards to this, and you can see the commercial value and estimated charge based upon our 2024 budget numbers. If you wanted to see where specifically your parcel fell. It should also be noted that tax exempt properties, we only have about 15, but each parcel that they own would also receive a charge for this replacement system. And tax exempt would, per parcel would pay 2 units or approximately $300 per parcel for the replacement plan charge on an annual basis. I don't see any questions, so we'll move on to the next one. Let's talk parking. Oh, Barbara.
Thanks. So, Rebecca, $153 here, $150 there, wheel tax levy increase. When we have a a house, let's say it's $340,000. This is all adding up to be real money. So what would the total be? Because we can look at these small numbers, but what does it all add up to? I think is what most of us would really like to know. Thank you.
Sure. So that's going to be dependent on the high impact option, what the board chooses to do with the high impact option. So you're correct, Barbara. If there was an implementation of the refuse recycling charge, the streetlight system replacement plan charge, that's around 300, then you're going to have, let's say you own a vehicle or two vehicles. It will be $60 extra and either to register those vehicles on an annual basis. However, I will say the next option that we talk about as a high impact option is also utilizing some additional fund balance from the parking utility. So the board may have options to use some one-time revenues that they have available in order to assist the next budget year, but it does not continue after that one-time revenue is used because it's not being replenished at a fast enough time rate to provide an ongoing annual revenue. These are the options that are on the table. However, I don't know if or all or which parts the board will look at to implement within the 2025 budget. And here is, I think, the really helpful thing about you asking questions like that. And for all of you who came on the call, I think one of the best things in our community right now is the fact that from my humble perspective, and I'm just one, but I think that you are working with a board that wants to do the best that they possibly can for Shorewood moving forward. The structure of doing these public outreaches and wanting the public to weigh in with their viewpoint is something that they were asked to consider, heartily agreed, because the feedback and questions and comments like those are things that then they're going to take into consideration so that their policy direction ideally is outcome of the community at large and the voice that they have and as a part of the process. So I feel honored. I know this is a tough subject, but I'm honored to be with you guys tonight talking about this. I really hope you come back and keep talking with me as we go through, hopefully using forum like this to not only describe our projects, but help leverage the voice of the community as a whole, so that they can hear that type of message. Okay, Barbara, I see your hand raised. I don't know if you ever put it down from the first time. Okay, you did. Thank you. Karen.
So to piggyback on what Barbara's saying, and I heard what you said that the board has to take all this feedback, but to come up with the funds for the 44 million, the 20 million, the 17.4, et cetera, they have to implement all of these. They just need mounds of money to do all this. Isn't that what it's gonna boil down to? Is, well, folks, Shorewoodians, we need streetlights, we need this mandate from the EPA, et cetera. So we have to do all of these. And there's a question mark in there, and yeah, and sort of it's a statement, but I don't understand how they can't do, unfortunately, how can't do all of them, given the expenses of these vital utility upgrades that are needed. And even if we get some federal funds and your consultants go back and say, okay, we actually didn't research grants as we should have. We're gonna go to do that and sharpen our pencils and do that. I don't think they're gonna come up with millions and millions that are required.
So, your point is well taken. one of the reasons why it was important to us in terms of, from like the staff perspective of talking about these items is because in the recalibration of our long-range financial plan, it was the first time this year that we took that deeper dive into what do we think these large estimates will be for lead service line, for streetlights. And we needed to put that into the model to see what it did. And so this communication is our reach out to say, we did this work. We recalibrate these plans each year. This is what we saw. And we wanted to, as proactive as you can be with a $44 million mandate, we want to talk about them and we want to see what those options are as we go forward in terms of how we deploy. And attempt to plan and tackle them moving forward.
I appreciate that. I just feel blindsided by these numbers.
Yeah. So that, Karen, that's exactly why I'm mentioning to you the process that we went through this year, because if I were you, not if you haven't been someone who's really been, watching them, even if you have been watching it, that was a huge number to put on the table this year. And I don't know of any board member who wants to receive a $44 million project number in the scope of their financial planning. I don't know of any. Because it's really hard. And they didn't cause it, right? I mean, this is just so that's part of that's a challenge. And I'll just speak for myself. It's sometimes a challenge for me. When you look at, the different options and trying to see how you could do things differently or move things around. So, you're absolutely on point. But what I'm also trying to say is that I think you really have a group that's leading you, and you have me and you have the other people who are really technically skilled in this, who are working with us on it to try to peel back those layers, to see what we can do to help it.
Okay, and these are hard numbers for us residents to swallow.
Yes. I'm going to transition to this next slide, which has been up for a little bit, but for those of you who aren't aware, the village has had a parking utility for on-street and overnight parking. So, a couple decades ago, the village had said, gosh, we really need to, buy some land for purposes of parking. We currently have 2 lots, public lots, with property that has been purchased on North Oakland Avenue, one which is just north of Harry's Bar and Grill, and the other which is located closer to Kensington, that are off-street lots, those lots are currently, we sell monthly permits for people to park overnight in those lots. And they primarily service the buildings next to them that may have been constructed at a time when parking wasn't necessarily of the mindset because they had the streetcar, or the building was just constructed and there was not capacity to have additional parking or place additional parking in other locations. We also have the River Park lot, which has a considerable amount of overnight 24-hour permits, and then some limited parking permits at Hubbard. Over the course of time, the village bought those lots on Oakland, and then they didn't move to purchase any additional land. And now the mindset on parking is from a planning perspective, is that perhaps parking is not, these, in particular, these 2 lots, maybe that's not the most valuable use of the land. Right now, we own those lots, we administer the program, a portion of the parking utility funds, that, the software for those permits, maintenance for snow and ice removal on the lots. And then a portion of the salaries and the benefits for police, civilian, employees to parking check on the lots. This fund over the course of time has generated approximately, 475,000 in fund balance. And so the village board does have an option of utilizing some of this one-time revenue to assist in decreasing, a budget hole in a given year, either all or in part. However, it should also be noted that the funds for the utility and the fund balance there was also placed there for purposes of needed reconstruction or full improvements of some of these lots. So if the one-time use is used for purposes of the budget, either in whole or in part, those funds will not come back in that way. They would need to be those reconstruction of either the lots or other parking areas that could be funded from the parking utility will need to be financed similar to the other projects in whatever future year they're required. Hey, Kelly. Kelly? Oh,
It's Keith.
oh,
I
Keith,
use
that
my
was
wife.
it. I was trying to think of your name, Keith. I knew it was a
That's okay.
K.
It's okay. I have a question. This relates to, I was there, I reviewed the YouTube, the Zoom for the proposed development of the 3 lots.
Oh, okay.
Do you have a breakdown of how much yearly does the parking utility fund take in? And do you have it per lot? And does that, then can you break that down with, I looked at all the proposals from all the developers, what they think their estimated property tax income would be, and what would be can you parse that out, and what would be the delta? What would the benefit of, and I know it's a different topic of discussion, but I think it's very germane to this because we would be getting rid of a revenue stream, which is the parking lot fees that we generate.
Mhm.
So do you have that ability to parse out that data? How much a year do we bring in for all of our lots? Do you have it per lot, like the library, River Park, the one on Kensington and whatnot?
Yes. And after this, if you want to follow up with me directly, I don't know the number off the top of my head and I don't have it right in front of me, but I did do that analysis on those 2 lots, and they were estimates, right? Because we're not through a whole fiscal year, but every year we can see how much each of those lots. So you could even do it off of 2023 numbers, but we
Okay.
did projections based upon how the permitting was done for 2 of those, or 3. It was in a prior memo a little while ago, but I can pull that for you if you'd like to
Okay.
take a look at it.
I'd love to. And would that be information that I'd be able to disclose with other people or?
Oh, absolutely. It's been
Okay.
out in our public packet on these for a while.
I know
It's,
sometimes it's very tough to find information.
yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. I'd welcome, I know once I would have an opportunity just to look at the files, I could find it for you and send it to you. So just call me or shoot me an email.
Yeah, I'll shoot you an email. That's much easier. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. So then we're on to one of our one of the last high impact options. And I mentioned this earlier in the call, I think when we were talking about projects. So if someone's newer to the call, those of you who have been on since the beginning, thank you for staying on. For those of you who are newer to the call, one of the things that was talked about and an option that we want to discuss with the board this year is funding only critical items in the capital budget and then deferring the remainder of any of that equipment scheduled to allow the board time to work with staff and taking a greater detailed look at each of those line items and how they are staggered and placed over the next 10 years. The board in some preliminary discussion has expressed a desire to really evaluate how we're funding it, when we're funding it. Wants I think, look at, you know, could we do this in a different way? Or if we contracted for the service, would we need the equipment? They want to evaluate some different things. I welcome this opportunity with the board. It's something that is important for both myself and the finance director to really get a confirmed handle on how we're going to fund the equipment over the course of time so that we can refine this capital equipment number to the best that we can with the best estimates that we can as we do this long range financial projection moving forward. So I'm hopeful that the board will choose this option and that, you know, we can start doing that work and then communicating back out what progress we're making in the first and second quarter of 2025. So I'm going to pause here for a second. I'm going to open a water because I'm a little parched. I've been talking a lot. And Chris, you were at the last feedback slide, and I just kind of wanted to cover that a little bit. So we're fortunate, and I'm fortunate that you gave time to be here with me tonight. Again, I want to let you know how much it's appreciated by not only me, but everyone here who's working on this budget with you and for you. I want to let you know of a new thing that we've started this year that I intend to continue with next year. We have put together a webpage that talks to the 2025 budget, the options that we're looking at, and that can plug you into each of not only this public input opportunity and education opportunity, but every other one that we've been doing. So you see the schedule of where we've been, who we've been communicating with. And then if we do have feedback devices that come from this session tonight, it will be the recording of this meeting. We'll be launching that and putting that on the website and doing that with a long-term approach in mind. So I just so happen to work in one of these environments where the 7 elected officials over the course of the next 10 and 20 years will change. And one of the things that I want to make sure we're always really clear on is what we talked about in a given year, what we evaluated, the decisions that were made, so that the next year, when you may have different people or new people from the community moving in, you can look back to see what we did, what those decisions were, and whether or not we should reconsider looking at something because perhaps some different conditions have changed. So and there is where you're going to see us logging through this website, our 2025 activity. It's also the location where, you know, whether outside of the poll, if you have feedback or thoughts that you'd like to share, you can just click the contact us button, and that's going to provide your comments along with the other polling questions to the village board before they continue on with their budget process here, so they can see that feedback. And then for any of you who, let's say it's more detailed, whether it be that parking lot question or the there was a person on the call who had a specific lead service line question for me, and I think their property, I just couldn't hear her correctly. You're welcome to reach out to me directly. I will try to help you with what I know. If I don't know, I'll see if there's a researcher or another staff member who does, but I would welcome the opportunity to connect with you. And I really want to express my gratitude for you taking the time. I hope we made this easy for you to connect with us tonight. And, you know, we're hoping to do this more in the future. Hey, Kelly.
It's Keith again. It's
Oh,
okay.
Keith, sorry.
No, okay. You're probably going to get tired of hearing from me. I have a couple
No,
questions.
it's okay. Welcome back, Keith.
So, you know, just following up with what like Barbara and Karen said, you know, I'm just doing my rough math on my iPhone here. And, you know, for my house, with my 2 cars, I'm looking at, you know, $550, probably $600 or more if the board implements just a 2% levy and all the other stuff. And I referenced earlier, you know, trying to find stuff on the village website is kind of tough. And in one of your village manager memos, a while back, you talked about a new position that we opened for the village of Shorewood, and I don't know if that position's been filled. You're now coming to us, the residents, to open up our pocketbooks to help fund these things. And you're asking us for, we talk about Shorewood being affordable, and just right now, you're going to raise my cost to live in Shorewood by, if everything gets implemented, $500. You're going to price people out of Shorewood with all of this stuff. Shorewood already has a very high, extremely high barrier to entry because of, it's a desirable location, good schools, good community, good infrastructure, but we keep on asking more. What is the village board? What have you as the village manager done to rein in our expenses? Did we fill that position that was mentioned in your village manager's memo? I forget what the position was. I couldn't find it. I didn't keep the old manager's memo to reference for my own. That's shame on me. Where have we gone to all the other department heads? Where have we taken our pencil out? And where can we cut back our expenses? Where can we save? Before you're coming to me and asking me for money, I'd equate this to me, I just put in a new bathroom in my house. And if I couldn't afford, I did it and say, I can afford it, but what if I couldn't? And going to my boss and going, hey, you need to give me money so I can pay for this. And this is what it kind of feels like right now. You haven't told us, hey, this is what we're doing to tighten our belt. We're all feeling the crush of inflation, every single one of us. We buy groceries, we pay for gas, we pay for this. And there's people in this village that are on fixed incomes, many retirees, and you're going to price them, possibly out of their homes. So what are you as the village manager doing to rein in our expenses? You talked about, I understand paying employees competitive salaries to keep them, but did we give them those competitive salaries with no money in the bank? And now you're coming to the village residents and saying, hey, we got to pay for this. We didn't have the money, but we still did it. Now you got to pay for it.
I'm going to work backwards, and then if I miss something, you can chime in.
I will.
Is that fair? Okay. So with regards to the compensation, that is also one of those impacts, I believe, of inflation. We were not this far out of range, competitive range with salaries, and since the last 3 years. So as again, I mentioned, we do that salary survey every 2 years. We did it every 3 due to COVID and a change in the position with new employee who filled that position to acclimate them to our structure. And that's what led to the data coming about just now. With regards to your comments and feedback about department heads and services, and Christina Domer, who is our finance director, is on the call now, so she can weigh in if she wants to, share anything else. But we're having that and have been having that same exact discussion, which is where can we actually cut? Any cuts will really come down to 3 things: reduction in service, reduction in employees, or trying to find a way to deploy the service in a different way. After watching the department heads and working with them for the last couple of years, there's not, and having seen the numbers and deep dives, your budget is lean. We will always go back and retool, because I'm a fan that you always go back and you take a look at. There's always changes. That's why we recalibrate a lot of this data on an annual basis. But that, and what we are suggesting is that we continue to do that, but also do that with you, the community, so that we do so thoughtfully. Because we really need that impact also from all of you if we're going to make a change of a magnitude that's going to significantly impact. None of them that we see rise to a high level of impact to date as some of the ones that we've discussed tonight. but we want to continue and have that conversation and continue in these types of formats to do that with you in a way that the board feels appropriate. Now I'm kind of coming back to the first part of your comments where you were talking about affordability and being here. That is a topic that the board brings up. I mean, they have those concerns, and I share that because they've been noted during the scope of our meeting. I've also received the feedback of how can we be talking in this community about affordability and providing affordable housing when, you know, these impacts are happening from a tax perspective. So I fully anticipate that that's a part, those are going to be comments that come back, that we've already received them and that we're going to continue to need to learn into. But directly when we look at the operational aspects of the budget, that direct answer is, I believe that we're going to be back looking at that at the conclusion of this budget cycle and every budget cycle as we move forward.
So if I understand, so we did create a new position in the villages, as if that's what I just understood.
Oh, sorry, that was the only other thing. I don't know what position you're talking about.
There was something in a village manager's memo, you talked about a new position and you just hired someone or something like that.
We haven't, the only new position that I think, and Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the only new position that I would have talked about, I think in the past, if we've hired someone in the last year, it's to replace a position that we've had. So it's to fill a vacancy, either someone resigned or, you know, something of that nature. The one position that we have talked about adding is for a utility superintendent, because of the fact that it's not feasible to add the significance of this additional infrastructure from LSL and all of the water main without some additional help. We currently have one supervisor who's overseeing 17 different people and working within a structure of providing these current services, plus the additional infrastructure projects that we had going on already that are and continue to be significant, but having someone very focused on how to deploy on lead service lines and the water main, because it's not just about water. It's impacting, depending on what method we use with a particular water main on a particular block and the cost benefit of that, it requires significant time.
Just to jump in, that's correct. The utilities director has not been hired for, and I believe that Christina and David have mentioned around about July 2025 hire date, so about half the year.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. I just think it'd be, you know, worthwhile for the village, for you as the village manager to come to us and tell us, this is what we're doing. You know, we're doing our part. This is, this, God, what is that? Starship Troopers, do your part. This is what we're doing to, curb our expenses, rein it. This is what we can, or, hey, we're already running a lean operation. We can't run it any leaner, but that would be very helpful if you could, give us that information before you just come out and say, hey, we need this, and this from you. We need an extra, if it's a 2% levy, an extra $500 a year out of you. If your house is, $350,000, you got 2 cars, and we do the street light, we do the refuse taxes and the wheel tax. We need, for you to have an informed electorate, you need to come at us with that information so we can see that you are doing something, because like I equated it to, it'd be like me doing an improvement on my house or buying a new car, and I know I can't afford it, and I buy it and I do it, and then I go to my boss and go, hey, I need a pay raise. He's going to say, hey, manage your own finances first before you come and ask for a pay raise. And right now, and I've looked at all the documentation you sent out. I've looked at your comprehensive budget plan and all the stuff that you've put out and through your office, and I haven't seen anything in there where you've stated this is what we're doing as a village to be fiscally responsible. All I see is, hey, we've got all these projects we need to do, and we need this from you.
Keith, I really appreciate that feedback. I'm gonna take that back. And think about what we can provide and incorporate within that, because you're right, we haven't.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll yield my time.
We do have a few more hands up. I believe Karen is first, then we have Linda Larman and Barbara Kylie Miller.
Okay.
Thank you. Just to add to what Kim was saying, in addition to looking at cost cutting, I'm frankly just appalled that our neighbor Charles spent 10 minutes while you were presenting and found numerous grant opportunities, and the consultants who are we are paying these consultants haven't done their due diligence. Had they gone to the EPA and you know, all the different funds that are available for these billions of these hundreds of millions of dollars that are need funding. So I'm just really, really disappointed with that, because we're leaving millions on the table. Potentially. I just wanted to express that.
Thank you.
Linda Larman, you're next up, if you're ready.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll be brief. One of the things I would like you to look at, the board to look at, and the staff to look at is what more can be done in terms of raising revenues from the commercial interests in Shorewood. It's kind of appalling to me, unless this is a legal constriction, that Metro Market, that the Kroger Corporation would only pay on some of these user fees 10 times more than what I would be paying. And you know, I'm not sure how else really they are contributing to the revenues in Shorewood. You know, the related point is that, as you said, Rebecca, 53% of our population are tenants, which I think is the highest of any place in the North Shore, if I recall. So what's being asked here is that a very small percentage of people, those being residential property owners, really pick up a gigantic amount of money to pay for these projects. And so I wonder what more can be done. You know, I would ask you to look at very creatively, including looking at other municipalities, whether it be in our area or nationally, how we can get our businesses to pay more.
So noted. Thank you for that feedback.
Thank you.
And Barbara?
Thanks, Chris. I was thinking perhaps the new position that Keith was thinking about there was a mention, maybe it was in the manager's memo a month or several months ago, about a sustainability person that we were going to share the expense with another community. Sorry, I have a cold. And so I never heard whether that position was filled, but I thought perhaps that's what he was thinking of, and whatever happened with that idea.
Oh, okay, I can answer that one. So sustainability coordinator, it is a grant that we applied for with multiple, it was led by the city of Milwaukee. It was for communities who desired to participate in Milwaukee County. Primarily, those three were Shorewood, Wauwatosa, West Dallas, and I believe the city. And it was 100% funding for implementing large sustainability initiatives. So one of the challenges we have as a smaller community is that we don't have capacity to have a sustainability manager. There's just not But yet we want to be able to tap into someone who can guide us on that realm and has that level of expertise. And so a portion of what the fund that was applied, or the funding that was applied for, was to fund, pardon me, a sustainability manager that would service all of our communities. We would have provided office space for that person, but we didn't have a percentage contribution into what their salary would be. They would have primarily been in those 4 communities. Unfortunately, the city did not receive that grant. So we will not be looking, there won't be someone here providing those, that specialized service.
Thank you.
Sure. And Liz, I
Last
think
hand, yeah.
you're the last hand, and I think you're gonna be the last question of the night, only because we're at 8:02. And one of one of the requests that came to me after the last meeting is that we keep it to a defined time. So
That sounds good.
we're gonna end with you, and it's good to have you back on the call.
Thanks. So I can appreciate that the lead pipe removal and replacement project is $44 million, and that is a huge amount of money. But even without that, you guys are asking for $66 million. We wouldn't have been able to absorb that even without the lead project. So that's just a point of that I'd like to lay out for people. And then also, I'm looking for reassurance that if I fill out the survey where it requires me to rank the options that you've laid out here tonight and on Thursday, that if I add feedback and comments later on, as I've heard that you can do later on in the survey, that those are clearly and transparently considered, because I think the design, there's a flaw in that design of that poll, that it is required to rank those, because it could be considered an attempt at getting the residents to vote on something without actually voting on something. And by not letting you move forward in the survey without doing that, you're kind of forcing people's hands. And clearly, by the feedback on today and then on Thursday, we aren't okay with just these options. We need to see more from you guys. And so I'd like reassurance that that what we're talking about tonight will be considered. And that maybe going forward, we not use the ranking system quite yet in a process like this.
Okay. I'm just taking the note.
Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. Chris has diligently reminded me that people can, if you don't want to rank, you can also go to the webpage and click the contact section, and that can also allow you to add in additional feedback as well.
Right, that's the free form comment box. So yeah, if you scroll down to contact us, there's a link there, and it's a completely separate Google form. So yeah, thank you for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you again for everybody taking the time to be with us tonight. I hope you have a peaceful evening.